Well, hello there. I'm coming from the heavens. I have like a little bit of a lightning effect over my head here. We are going to look at a video from, what is his name actually? Brandon Dillon. This is kind of part 2 of a video where he tried out Linux. Actually, good video, the first one. But I like gaming, so I found this a little bit more interesting. Gaming on Linux for the first time, where he's talking about gaming on Linux from kind of a newbie viewpoint of Linux, meaning that he has not used Linux for long or at all. Again, I didn't really watch other than the first 5 seconds or 1 minute of the first video, because I saw this one in the recommendation. I'm like, yeah, I'd rather watch that one. Let's see what he's talking about here with gaming on Linux for the first time, because I love when people are using Linux for the first time and have not been influenced by Linux content creators and the Linux community, because we are really good at poisoning young people's mind or newbies to Linux mind. Anyway.
Gaming on Linux for the very first time, and here is what I thought of it. Warning to all the Linux users out there, it was not great.
Nope.
So if you haven't seen my last video where I installed,
and like I used to say when people are watching these kind of videos, if you are a Linux developer, open source software developer, or Linux distribution maker, when you see someone having problems with Linux or your software, you take the biggest notebook out that you can find. You lick that fucking pencil head and you start writing down every criticism that said person is giving you. And then you're going back and you're putting your big brain 10,000 IQ on, and you will be like, how can I fix this so they don't have those problems? That's how you make your software and your distribution better. Not by criticizing them, yelling at them, they are the problem. No. If he has a problem, the software is the problem. The distribution is the problem, not him.
Linux for the first time, I recommend watching that in the link in the description. I go through like the distros that I wanted to try out and talk about why I wanted to switch to Linux in the first place. And then in this video, I tried playing some games for the very first time, and honestly, it was... there were a lot of weird quirks about it that really just kind of made me not want to use it very much. One of the first things I noticed...
I'm wondering if I'm getting slapped with like a copyright or something like that for this fucking background music.
when I was on Linux is that the internet speeds on Linux seem to be very slow, but also I noticed when I got back on Windows on this computer that it was like that also on Ethernet. So I don't think it was necessarily a like Windows Linux.
No, that could either be a BIOS upgrade that is needed. I had that problem with my internet. I didn't know it was slow, and then I had to update the BIOS to support a newer version of the Ryzen CPUs, and my internet actually went up by 1 or 2%. I was like, this is massive. Have I gotten, like, I went from downloading around 20 megabytes a second to 23 or 4, and I'm like, what the fuck, did I get a speed boost? And then I looked into it, and it was basically just because the BIOS drivers for the Ethernet card on my specific hardware, I needed an update.
Next thing, I think it was just my Ethernet wasn't working properly, and that kind of...
Okay, so it was this Ethernet cable.
I don't know, I think it was just one of the things I noticed on Linux, so... and it was a problem already, so I don't know, it just kind of didn't make me very happy when I saw that. Also, another thing I noticed is that when I would do OBS recording, it just was very, very laggy for some reason.
Yeah.
Like,
I've not laggy, but I've had Linux users ask me how I got my I record with OBS, and I've had people ask me how I get it so smooth, my recordings, because they have problem with it on the Linux. I'm like, well, I'm not using OBS on Linux to record. I run Linux in a VM. So yeah, I have videos about why I run Linux and VMs for video purposes. But yeah, I don't record. I use Windows 11 as a base right now, as a host system. So when I'm recording, it's done from Windows, and it just gives me a better recording. It also gives me better picture quality, I've noticed. Recording with OBS on Windows versus Linux. Can it be done? Yeah. Can you tweak OBS to be almost as good? looking as under Windows and get the smoothness fixed and stuff like that? Yeah. By, again, driver updates, tweaking the desktop environment that you're running, tweaking the driver. Sometimes under NVIDIA, you need to disable some pipelines, I think they're called, pipes or something like that, to make sure that the GNOME and stuff like that is not stuttering, or you don't get artifacting when you're having shadows and stuff like that. You basically just need to tweak it a little bit more under Linux than under Windows. But can it be done? Of course it can.
Like, I have a 3080, a 5800X. I don't think it should lag that much. I had the settings on to use like NVENC and everything, which I don't know if you guys know, that's basically NVIDIA's like encoding engine. And I don't know if engine's the right word, but like it's like the coding process that.
So NVENC basically runs on separate cores on your graphic card that in theory then should not go in and tax your graphic card. But here's the problem: they're still running off the same PCI lane. So if your game is almost using all of the resources for the graphic card and that PCI lane, which most graphic cards are not even maxing out the PCI lanes on PCI 3 we're on right now, or is it 4 and 5 is the new? I can't remember right now. But your graphic card can get IO'd out, basically, meaning that your graphic card can be working so hard on your game that it like the NVENC engine, if it's running 100%, the NVENC engines don't have it really don't work. It's really complicated. It can be a little bit it's still, the graphic card still needs to focus on it, even though it's running on separate streaming cores, as they're called. The graphic card still needs to dedicate its GPU to it and some resources to it. It has to dedicate electricity to it and memory to it and stuff like that. So if your gaming cores, or what you will call them, are taking all of the memory and all of that fucking shit, the NVENC encoder can get a little bit iffy-diffy. And I noticed this myself. I use NVENC right now, but when I used to live stream, if I live stream with a game that was taxing my graphic card to close to 95%, the NVENC encoder started to fuck off. It didn't work right well. If it was under 90%, the NVENC encoder worked fine. And if I had, like I said, if I were playing a game that was taxing my graphic card to like 95, 100%, I had to switch to CPU encoding.
NVIDIA chips uses, like when you're streaming or when you're recording, and it's supposed to help encode everything and make it smoother, but for whatever reason on OBS on Linux, no matter how I fiddled with the settings, it just didn't want to work properly. Like, I recorded all the gameplay in, I think I did some of it in 1440p and then some of it in 1080p. And for whatever reason, it just wasn't a great experience. Also, another thing I noticed is that even on my 1440p monitor, Linux thought that it was a 5K monitor.
Wow.
I have no idea why. Like, it's 1440p, 144 hertz. It's not even 4K. Like, this monitor's 4K, but it was this monitor that was like, oh, this is a 5K monitor. And I'm just like, what? Just a couple weird bugs like that I don't really understand why they were there. And it really just was not a great experience in my opinion. So I want to try a few different types of games on Linux. First, I want to try a native.
Show me the games. Native games, I think
game,
yeah.
And then I also wanted to do some translated games using Proton on Steam. I wanted to try a game using Lutris for Origin. I wanted to try Minecraft, and then I wanted to try GameCube emulation using Dolphin. So the game I chose,
I used to do that a lot with Dolphin.
For the native Linux support was Shadow of the Tomb Raider. When I was playing it, it was very smooth, like how I was playing it. Some things that I noticed, it did not have RTX support, which is smooth, like how I was playing it. Some things that I noticed, it did not have RTX support, which is very weird. I just think maybe on Linux, RTX isn't supported. I don't think.
No. So again, he don't know this because we don't talk about it under Linux because it's the negative about Linux, and we tend to shut the fuck up about negative things about Linux. But a lot of the new technologies with graphics and for the longest time, what is it called, DPI or the high picture density. I can't fucking remember right now. I don't think that works 100% under. Anyway. It's that makes your screen more brighter and more dense and stuff like that. That did kind of work now, but didn't work for the longest time. ray tracing is not working 100% under Linux yet. So here's the thing: if a new technology comes out for graphic cards under Windows, expect a year or so, maybe 2 years, 3 years before we kind of have support for that under Linux. A lot of popular technologies that are consumer level take a long ass time to get into the Linux kernel, into Linux in general, because Linux is not focused on the consumer; it's focused on the corporate world. I think it's HDI. It's called the high density flash thing. I'm getting a Halo effect again here.
I don't think it's necessarily because of Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I think it's more of a Linux thing. And like, I know it's one of those features where it's kind of a gimmick and not everyone's going to appreciate it, but...
Oh, there was some tearing there. Again, I don't know if this is because of OBS or it's recording software, but this looks really weird.
For a game with like visuals like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I want to have RTX on. I know for games like Call of Duty, like you might not want RTX on because you want to get the most frames, but for something like Shadow of the Tomb Raider where it's a single player game with a lot of like landscapes and like theatrics, I think for a game like that, you would want RTX on. And for those guys that don't know what RTX is, basically it's just ray traced lighting. It's something that like only the newer NVIDIA cards and like the newest AMD cards can do.
Yeah, I don't have a newer card that can do that. I don't have the money. Also, I don't game enough that I think it's justifiable for me to spend that much money on a new graphic card.
And then also the PS5 and the Xbox Series X can do it. But it's just one of those things where it's like, if RTX is a feature and I'm paying for it and I have a 3080, then I want to be able to use it.
Look, Linux people. The argument within the Linux community is that, why are you even it's only hype. You don't really need it. No, but I have the ability to use it, so therefore I want to use it. But a lot of Linux people, they're like, oh, well, you don't need it. No, I don't need it. But I have things that can run it, so therefore I want to run it. It's not an argument. It's not a valid counterpoint. Like, you don't need to run Linux. Why are you running Linux then? You don't need to. You can happily live on Windows. You can run FreeBSD in a lot of instances. Why are you running Linux? Because you want to. So why is he spending thousands of dollars on a massive graphic cards with ray tracing? Because he wants to use ray tracing. Does he need it to play the game? No. But he kind of wants to, okay?
I understand that with RTX support, a lot of that comes down to NVIDIA giving the support to Linux, which if they did give it to Linux, maybe in the future I would be willing to try it out again. But it was just one of those things where I would have liked to see it. Obviously, it's not like a deal breaker for me because it's RTX. It's not something like super important, but it was just something that was missing that I would have liked to see. During the gameplay, I didn't notice any performance hits, and it felt like very smooth.
It don't look smooth. I have to be honest. It looks jerky. It looks stuttery. Like I said, with the eyebrows and stuff like that, when they're moving, it's like, you know, it's like when you're moving a leaflet, you know, it's doing like this, like, you know, this part is moving, then this comes, there's a little bit of a delay. I don't know if that's YouTube, the editing software, the recording software, or just me pretending to look at things that's not there. I have no fucking idea.
The only thing that took me out of it was looking over at my OBS window and seeing that it was super choppy, and I'm like, okay. Oh my god, why is this super choppy?
OBS then.
But if I was just focusing on the game itself, this is one of the examples of a game that would have worked very, very well on Linux. Then for Proton, I want to try out 2 games, one of them being a popular game and one of them being a not very popular game. For the popular game, I chose the very graphically demanding Among Us. I know nobody really plays Among Us anymore, but like, you know, I still do sometimes. Twitch.tv/Brandon Dillon. And I wanted to at least see how it works, mainly just because it's a game that gained a lot of support, and I think as a game that's very popular, I think we need to be able to see how well it will run on Linux. So on Linux, Among Us felt pretty much normal. Like, obviously it's not like a very graphically demanding game. Obviously frame rate doesn't matter that much on Among Us. Like, everything felt smooth still. It wasn't like anything like bad that I noticed. The only couple of things I noticed, there were a couple of weird bugs. Like any of the tasks in Among Us where you would have to click somewhere, like the weapons task, where it's like the radar. That one, even when you click in the middle, it doesn't line up.
Okay.
I think like the mouse calibration on Among Us for Linux is just off, and that's something
That sounds really strange, though.
that like if I played it a lot more, I'd be able to get used to it.
Yeah, but you should not. Like, this is the problem. You should not get used to it.
But like it's one of those really like weird bugs that I don't think should be a bug in the first place. Then again, it's a game translated to work on Linux. It's not a native Linux game. But that being said, it was still not a great experience when I was doing those tasks, at least. So during like the air filter task, which if you don't remember, it's like with the leaves and you have to like push them into the vacuum. For whatever reason, my screen would just move all the way to the left.
Wow.
Especially if I was like a ghost that round. And it really just was so random, and I don't understand why it was doing that. Now for a game that's not very popular but is also translated and has been said to work well on Linux, WWE 2K19. I know 2K22 is out. I don't have it on PC. I have it on PS5. I have 2K19. And you know what? 2K19 is still a great game, so I wanted to see how well it would work on Linux. And unfortunately for this one, even though it had a really good score on ProtonDB, which is like a website that ranks all the games that work with Proton, this game did not work very well. On a 1440p monitor with a 3080 on Windows, the game would have ran very, very smooth, would have gone like 60 FPS. It would have been an overall enjoyable experience. But on Linux, it was slow, it was a little choppy. I think I forgot to turn off motion blur, so it was blurry. And it was not a good experience at all. Also, 2K19 on Linux did support controllers, but only kind of. So when you plug in a controller, instead of showing like X, A, B, Y, or like the PlayStation controls, it would show numbers instead.
Okay.
And it just makes it a little confusing if you don't know the controls of a game. And if you're someone who plays games with a controller on PC or Linux, I don't particularly recommend it unless you learn the Linux like button layout.
And I will say this because I will get people like, well, why is he playing those games? Because Elden Ring works better and Fallout 4 works better on the Linux. Yes. There are games that works better on the Linux, okay? But if you look at all of the games that people are playing right now, if 1, 2, 3, 5, or 10 of those games work better on the Linux, but the majority don't make Linux a better gaming platform. It makes it a better gaming platform for those 10 specific games, okay? Not in general. I have made a couple of videos about gaming on the Linux, and I have but Elden Ring and Fallout 4 and Skyrim, I think is another one, right? Yeah, if you play those games, you only play those games, you're right, run Linux. I play many different games, and most of them run worse or at all, or not at all on the Linux. So again, I have the options to get a better gaming experience or be able to play them. So why the fuck would I not run them on the Windows then? Just because your game run okay on the Linux don't mean that every game does. So get your head out of your ass with that, because it twice up the wall. Again, it's people that can't seem to look outside of their own little experience and their own little world. This is games he plays. And if they are not running on the Linux to his satisfaction, that's a problem. We need to fix that. Even if you don't play it. But if he do, we need to fix it. Because he's not the only one. All of those games are still really popular games. There are probably more people playing those games he just mentioned right now than Fallout 4. Maybe not Skyrim, but Fallout 4 and Elden Ring. Maybe Elden Ring is still quite popular.
The thing is, like, I know 2K19 is a game that I've played before. I've streamed it before even. But it's been a long time since I've played it. and 2K22 has different controls on the PS5. So it was kind of like I had to like kind of relearn WWE 2K19, but I would see myself going to press the 2K22 buttons and it would make me like mess up in the game. So I kind of just wish that it would show like either Xbox or PlayStation controls, regardless of if it's a PS5 or Xbox controller, because I know both layouts. So it wouldn't be that hard for me to pick up on if I see like Xbox controls and I'm using a PlayStation
He is controller neutral, people. He knows both layouts.
controller. And overall, the game just was not a very good experience. I don't recommend that if you like to play the WWE games. I do not recommend installing Linux at all if you're one of those gamers. Maybe 2K22 is better on it, but I have no idea. Minecraft is a game that really let me down on Linux.
Funny enough, I haven't played Minecraft under Linux for ages, like years actually. But it used to be running kind of okay.
So when I first launched Minecraft, full screen just didn't work. It was like the game would full screen, but like for using the mouse, it would only work in the windowed section that like you had open beforehand. And it was just such a weird bug.
Yeah.
Like usually when you full screen a game, every time I've done it on Windows, it just worked. And it was just very, very weird. After relaunching it though, the game worked fine. Like the like it would line up and everything. But something I noticed is that when VSync was turned on, it would default to 60 FPS, but I have a 144 hertz monitor, so that doesn't really make much sense to me. If you guys don't know what VSync is, to keep it basic, it will limit the frame rate to whatever your monitor is to avoid like tearing and everything.
And therefore can also introduce input lag and so on and so on. So if you're playing a competitive shooter, it's mostly recommended for you to not use VSync. Just a tip out there.
But it was going at half the FPS that I could have gotten, and that was kind of annoying. As for GameCube emulation, this was probably the one that worked best for me. It took a little bit more of like configuration, but even on Windows, GameCube emulation takes a little bit of configuration, so I wasn't really upset about it. I did have to fix some of my controller setup a little bit at points because I think it just kind of undid itself. So that was kind of annoying, but other than that, it was a pretty normal experience. Everything was pretty smooth. The only things I noticed, by the way, the game I played was Simpsons Hit and Run. The only things I noticed were that the loading screens with audio were laggy. Like the loading screen worked and everything. The loading screen itself wasn't laggy. It was just the audio that was behind it that was laggy. Everything else, the audio was fine, so I don't know exactly what the problem was there, but it's emulation, so I'm not gonna get too butthurt over it. And overall, this was like the first thing I did on Linux where it just was an overall good experience, and I was kind of taken out of the fact that I was using Linux instead of Windows, and I wasn't really worrying about that, I guess. Something I forgot to mention, I was going to be playing games on Origin through Lutris, but for whatever reason, Origin wouldn't let me log in. I wanted to try Jedi.
So I have played some Origin games under Linux. I can't fucking remember the game. And it was a lot of hit and miss with what games kind of worked and did not work.
Fallen Order, but it just didn't want to work. Overall, the experience on Linux was fine. I think depending on the games that you play, it could be a good experience for you, but for me, I just didn't really like it that much. I liked the user interface and everything. I like how Linux looks. I appreciate everything that you can do with Linux if you're not a gamer, but it's just a huge learning curve that I don't really have the time and effort to really put into it. I was pretty upset about OBS not working because it's one of those things where it's like I use OBS sometimes because I like streaming, and it just didn't want to work for me.
There's actually most streaming software don't work under Linux. The same with a lot of plugins for OBS don't work under Linux if you're heavy plugin use. I used to use a lot of plugins. I don't do anymore.
Also, other things like my mic and my Steam Deck don't work on Linux for whatever reason.
So I don't think that he's using it's not is it a USB? I don't think that's a USB mic. So it could be if he's connecting to a mixer or a Focusrite device, you know, the amplifier of or the input device where you convert the analog to digital signal to your computer. You know, the one he probably have a USB from a device like a mixer or a deck or something like that into his computer. So it could be that that's not supported. But because if it's a mic, like if it's a USB mic, it should pick it up. Like it's a generic mic, it should be picking it up. All mics is kind of working the same. Again, I'm oversimplifying here. But in my case, I'm going from a mic to a mixer and then into my computer. And if my mixer is not supported under Linux, it's luckily yes. But if it was not, this setup will not be working.
And it's one of those things where it's like, I paid a lot of money for this stuff. And like, I don't want to just kind of like take away the option of using those. And it was just a bummer. And like, here's the thing, even if I'm just using my mic on Discord or something, it's still nice to at least have a mic to use. The only mic I could use is the Camlink mic worked, but it would require me to have my camera plugged in and turned on like at all times that I'm on Discord. And even though like it's not a huge deal, it's just like a bigger hassle that I just don't want to deal with. The final verdict is that I am not going to stay on Linux. As a typical everyday user who just wants to play games, I don't think it really makes a lot of sense for me to switch over to Linux full time. It was fun to try, and I'm glad I did. And like, I do appreciate and understand a lot of the applications that require Linux. Like, I know there's server applications and like different coding applications. I know for stuff like that, Linux makes a lot of sense. I don't think for a typical everyday user it makes much sense. And I know that there's people in the Linux community who are going to say you are wrong, just you're stupid. But I don't know, it's just very difficult.
He's not wrong, he's not stupid. Here's the thing. Could he tweak and fiddle around with Linux and make it work? Yes. Could he sell his mic and mic setup and get something that worked with Linux? Yes. Could he go uncompromised with his gaming life? Yes. Could he tweak and fiddle and go uncompromised with what he used for a live stream? Yes. Should he? No. A lot of Linux users choose to compromise the things that they do. They are okay with less this, more irritation here, more problems there, this not working versus this working, just so they can say they run Linux for some reason or another, political, philosophical, or just that they just like Linux. There are some people that are willing to do that. Most people, they don't want to. First of all, they don't want to overcomplicate something that's already been simple. And that's already simple in their life. So going to Linux versus any other operating system is going to complicate your life. Now you have to find alternatives. You have to be a little bit more aware of what peripherals you buy. You have to be aware of stuff like your LEDs, you know. Your fancy fucking lighting shit don't work as good or at all as it does on the Windows. You know, you have to make a lot of compromises, which then means that you're complicating your life. Why would people want to complicate their life when it's simple? Or why would people, again, have to say, well, I have the opportunity to do this on the Windows or Mac OS, but I'm willing to not do that so I can say I run Linux. Why should they compromise in those areas when it makes no sense for them? Look at it like this. What do you gain as a human being for running Linux? I know a lot of people, oh, it's open source, don't affect your life whatsoever. It don't, like, Linux has been open source probably longer than he's been alive. Linux has been open source probably longer than any of you have used Linux. Did it infect your life in public school that you didn't run Linux? I don't think so. Oh, the privacy. Yeah, Linux takes less privacy, but if you look at your life, your day-to-day life, the way you live online and the way that your car, your phone, your credit card, your bank, and all of those institutes and things that you use on daily basis is infringing on your privacy. Windows is probably like 2 to 5% of that. So yeah, you take back 1 or 2 to 5% of privacy. Yeah, good on you. Good on you. Yeah, good on you. Oh, I own the software. Most people don't care about owning the software, okay? Oh, I have total control over the software on operating system. Most people don't give a fuck about that either. They don't even care that they can't change the wallpaper a lot of times. They don't care that they can't change the theme. I care about it. You care about it. But most people, they just want stock fucking Windows. They barely, if at all, change the wallpaper. My mom has used the same wallpaper for years now. She's like, oh, I like motorcycles. I found a fucking Harley Davidson and put it on her wallpaper, and it's never changed since. And it's been this on her computer since the first day she got it. And it's like probably 3 years ago or something like that. That's how most people run their systems. They don't care about all of that. So it's not going to impact your life whatsoever that you're not running Linux. So when you think about it like that, how important is it then that you can say that you run Linux? Not really important. But don't sit here and think that his life is now going to be worse for going back to Windows. He can now live stream better. He can now play games better. His peripherals now works. Where in reality, his life got worse by using Linux, which is a massive fucking bummer, because most people will have his experience. Most gamers will have his experience. Most everyday users will have his experience. If you want people to stick with Linux or move to Linux, he should not have any problems. And I don't care if, oh, he's using the wrong mic. No. Oh, he's using the wrong peripherals. No. He's playing the wrong games. No. He should not have a problem. Just because you are willing to compromise don't mean that other people should. It just means that you're willing to bend over and say to Linux, get into me without loop. I don't give a fuck because I want you in me. He's like, yeah, at least loop me up first. You get what I'm saying here? See you all later. Bye bye.